was a decade of breakthrough special effects and over-the-top storytelling. And now Loop and Larry are proud to bring you David Weiner, writer-director of In Search of Darkness, the definitive 80s horror documentary. Direct from Los Angeles, you'll hear stories only insiders can tell. This Friday, Loop and Larry will be celebrating horror's most iconic decade with very special guest David Weiner. Don't miss it. In a world filled with intergalactic space battles, metahuman destruction on a global scale, and psychopathic serial hauntings, there's only one team who can make sense of it all. When your world is overrun with rampant pop culture, call Loop and Larry, Guardians of Geek.
Wow, once again, explosions everywhere.
There is no escaping that. Never going to escape
Pop
that.
culture shrapnel, as I like to call it. All right, we have a very special podcast today. We've got a very special guest.
This is very exciting for Loop and I to have this gentleman on with us. His name is David Weiner, and let me give you a little bit of a background here. David spent a solid 13 years as a writer, interviewer for Entertainment Tonight. He was a regular contributor to The Hollywood Reporter, LA Weekly, and Variety. For a stint there, he was an executive editor at Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine.
Very cool.
Which is pretty amazing. He's also the creator of itcamefromblog.com, an amazing pop culture website which you should definitely check out. And because I'm a Star Wars nerd, as everybody at this point knows, this for me is pretty exciting. David was the one who actually broke the news worldwide that Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher were returning to Star Wars in The Force Awakens a full year before Disney announced it officially. And why did he do that? Well, because Mark Hamill told him. How cool is that?
You know what we should do is say hi to him. He's right here on the phone.
Hi.
I'm here.
Excellent. Well, let me just tell you why David's here. David's here because currently he is the writer and director of what could potentially be one of the coolest documentaries that we've seen in years, called In Search of Darkness, A Journey into Iconic 80s Horror. And it is the first documentary that literally is setting out to capture what made horror so incredible in the 1980s. And the 1980s is when Loop and I started really getting into horror. So for us, this is pretty exciting. So we wanted to talk to David a little bit about the process and how this all came to be.
So since you're there and we can ask you the question, why this documentary?
Why this documentary? Well, before I even lose my train of thought, I have to say that you guys have tremendous geek cred by putting the Wilhelm scream in your opening.
We actually based the entire intro around that. Thank you for noticing.
It's very, very important. Culture. It's a cultural touchstone at this point.
It really is.
Well, like you said, I have a background. I was the executive editor of Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine in 2015 and 2016. And I've been a monster kid ever since I was a kid, reading Famous Monsters, reading Fangoria, watching monster movies of a variety of sizes, whether it's, Frankenstein and Dracula and the Universal Monsters or Godzilla. And then the 80s, that all really kind of changed. And, the franchises grew. You had Friday the 13th franchise and Nightmare on Elm Street. Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween in 1978 just absolutely rocked my world and scared the absolute crap out of me.
Game changer for sure.
More, but I'm not sure if I can curse on your podcast. But an opportunity has came along to be part of this amazing collective that's doing these wonderful 80s documentaries that are executive produced by Robin Block, who is based in the UK. He's doing an 80s action heroes documentary. He's doing this 80s horror documentary, and he has more in store.
Oh, wow.
And I came onto this project, and, by hook and by crook and by perhaps just genuine enthusiasm, I'm now writing and directing it. So we've interviewed 40-plus icons of the era, everyone from Heather Langenkamp of Nightmare on Elm Street. We talked to Joe Dante, Gremlins and the Howling. Who else? Barbara Crampton, Stuart Gordon, Jeffrey Combs, and Brian Yuzna, who are all part of Reanimator and From Beyond. Greg Nicotero, boy, it just goes on and on and on. Tom Holland, Don Mancini of Child's Play, Fright Night.
You're literally you're listing the icons of our youth. So this is so fantastic.
Well, what's so wonderful about it for me is one of the things I've gotten to do for a living, which has been a real privilege and treat for me, is to be able to sit down with these people who I really, really admire: filmmakers, actors, special effects folks, composers, and really kind of pick their brains about the creative process. And if I can get a venue where we could talk for more than 5 or 10 minutes, like you would at a junket, you really get wonderful stories out of these people.
I can imagine. I mean, what they did for the genre at the time was completely groundbreaking. And I mean, a lot of them, I assume, were doing things for the first time as far as special effects and storytelling, because the genre hadn't developed the way it did until the 80s.
And it absolutely exploded in that decade with practical effects.
Yes.
And there was it was kind of the Wild West, because the whole dynamic about the way we would consume these movies was it wasn't always on the big screen or even the drive-in. You could go to your video store, or you could watch cable TV, sometimes at 2 a.m, like I did, watching Friday the 13th for the first time. It scared, again, the crap out of me. And I was 12. I will date myself with my age. I was 12 years old when that happened, in 1980.
Yeah.
I probably saw it in 81, on HBO. But
it was even scary on Laserdisc as well.
Yes.
Oh my God. But it was so crisp and clean, and the sound was so spectacular. The dynamic of how you could consume these movies changed, and it was, like I was saying, the Wild West, because the straight to video became a thing. So you didn't have to market your film. It costs a lot of money to market and distribute your film, and if you could just come up with the ultimate poster that sold to the person in the video store aisle exactly what they were looking for, whether it was a name or whether it was a gore or nudity or violence or whatever, the creativity of the fantasy element of it was, you had something that was really different than what you had before in the previous decade.
Can we talk a bit about the VHS era for 80s horror? Because I think that there'll never be a time like that again. Because I distinctively remember all the covers of all those horror movies, and it was just a special time.
I always go to Chopping Mall as the prime example of what I chose not to see, because I like Chopping Mall, and you see a bag with a bunch of body parts, and I was just like that. That's I love horror, but that's just I'm not feeling it. I just had my pizza dinner. I don't want it bar. So. And then I remember when I finally got to that movie, and I'm like, wait, this is like short circuit Terminator in a shopping mall.
Yeah.
Then I was like, wait a minute, this was completely sold in a different, to someone else, and it's very interesting. It
is, and it really those images, the still images from the posters and the VHS boxes, are part of what sort of sticks with us. It's interesting. We one of our earlier podcasts, we did a review of The Gate from the 80s. I hadn't seen it since probably the early 90s. Loop thinks he saw. I thought he saw it.
I wasn't sure. I saw so many horror movies at that time period.
But as soon as I showed him the cover art from the VHS box, instantly it came back.
Oh, it brings back. As these kids say these days, it brings back the feels.
Yes,
that's what the nostalgia is all about, and that's really what we're kind of searching for in Search of Darkness is an opportunity to make you say, "Oh my God, I remember that film," or "Oh, I always wanted to know more about that film, but I was afraid to even check it out at the video store."
That's right.
And if we've achieved our goal, you see this. You learn something, and then you go straight to, binge watch or go to, find some VHS at Goodwill.
Yeah.
VHS player.
That's right. Well, it's interesting. I've shown the trailer because the trailer is out now. The full-length trailer is out for the doc. And the trailer is every horror fan's memories all put together in one video. And I've shown it to a number of colleagues and friends, and every response I get is, I need to start rewatching those movies right now. Like right now. There's something visceral about seeing these images that you haven't seen since you were a kid, and how how different the horror genre and movie making has become since then. And
I mean, if anything, we're calling this the definitive documentary about 80s horror, and that's definitely a challenging term because there are so many amazing movies, and you could do sort of a broad spectrum and touch a little bit on some of the bigger films that are out there and the bigger franchise that I had mentioned earlier. But there are so many deep dive, strange titles. Even The Gate is one.
Yeah.
That's a great movie that really specialized in camera special effects and, forced perspective and so on and so forth. And that's a fun one, especially like when that body falls and you have all the little minions around.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing.
On the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. In talking with the copious amounts of people you've talked with so far, has there been a story that's really surprised you, like shocked you about how a film came together or what it took, or was there a moment that you just went, I had no idea?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I really need to lock those in my head because it's all a big jumble in my brain right now. There's so many great stories. There really are. I think what comes to mind right now, just randomly, is talking to Kane Hodder, who plays Jason in 4 of the Friday the 13th movies, 2 of them that were in the 80s, because he did 7. His first was 7, and then he did 8, and then 9. X. I'm now losing track
Jason
of
X,
which, but he did 4 of them. Jason X. But what am I missing? Oh, Jason Goes to Hell.
Yes, that's right.
Between that one. But he did he is a stunt man, and first and foremost, and he's a stunt coordinator, and with a very, 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 very imposing physique. But he was an absolute honor for him to put on that hockey mask. Director John Buechler, that he had worked with before, asked him personally to take on the role because they could have carried over the previous actor, but they wanted to be, he wanted to work with Kane Hodder.
Yeah.
John Buechler did. And so a couple things, so many stories, but he talked about one thing I thought which was quite compelling was the fact that he had been burned on camera. Actually, sorry, he had been filming himself doing a stunt just for his reel, just for his promotional resume.
Oh, yeah.
And he burned himself dangerously, and he was in the hospital.
Wow.
Anyway, so coming to Friday the 13th, Part 7, he did a full body burn, willingly doing this. And he basically faced his demons, got in his suit, and he did the longest burn to date on camera for that movie, and it's pretty intense.
Was there anyone that you wanted to interview that you didn't get a chance to?
Well, here's the thing. Yes, millions.
It's an open-ended question, really.
Think of it this way. It's like you invite. There's only so many people that you can invite to your party when you invite anyone, or you hope to invite anyone. And at a certain point, if you invite one person, you think, well, socially, I need to invite that next person because that just makes sense. But at a certain point, when you say, I want to have a party of about 25 or 30 people, and you have 50 people in the room, and you still haven't invited everyone you wanted, you got to stop at a certain point. Right. So that's my answer, really. We only have so much time and so much of a budget and so much of, 40 people, where we've spoken to each of them for an hour or more.
Wow. That's a lot of tape.
Hours and hours and hours of footage.
That's remarkable. So in talking to all of these people and getting all these stories, what is the overall sense of, what separates the horror genre from, except for the scares and that sort of thing, what separates horror from comedy and drama, and why do people attach themselves so viciously to
people really I think collectively it's a cathartic experience for people to watch horror. People like to be safe in a movie theater to watch a horror movie and be scared and have their pulse race and sit at the edge of their seat, knowing at the very end they can walk away and be perfectly safe, ideally. And it's the same thing like if you got on a roller coaster. You get on there knowing that you're going to feel like your life is in jeopardy, but when all is said and done, other than it muscles up your hair, you're good to go, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it's a similar experience, reason why people pay to see horror over and over. That's the reason why. And I think, you got to make sure that you, when you're talking about horror, that a lot of times people sort of delineate, well, it's only kind of one type of genre entertainment, but a lot of horror has a toehold or balances or straddles fantasy and comedy. You know, I talked to Joe Dante about The Burbs, for a lot of, because it's such a great film where if you literally just changed the soundtrack to something more menacing, you have a horror film there.
Absolutely. That's true. And I mean, a lot of the 80s horror movies sort of had that played up the comedy end of it. Like, Gremlins and those sorts of movies made being scared funny as well.
And interestingly enough, Joe Dante talks about Gremlins and how that originally was a much darker story. Yeah. And he even said, he revealed that Gizmo, the Mogwai, was supposed to turn into a gremlin himself. He was supposed to be Stripe.
Oh.
But he was so beloved and cute, and they decided that Zach Galligan needed a sidekick. They totally redid it to be much more of a whimsical film, although it barely towed the line there because it's one of the films that angry parents said, we need PG-13 in our lives.
As far as franchises, you talked about them before, but why were all the franchises so successful in the 80s? Because they're still remaking them now.
Well, I think they build on each other, really. I think once the Michael Myers and the Jasons were established, and even the Freddy Kruegers, everyone said, I want mine. I want my own. I want my own Pinhead. I want my own Chucky. Mm-hmm. People are responding to these, and you could if you do a decent film, then you get to build on it. And even if the film is not that great, the essence of the genre is that you could do a lot with a low budget, and people will still see it because it has enough of the elements that people want to rent or see or sit in the theater for or watch on TV. And I think that's what separates horror from any other genre, is that I think people are a lot more forgiving of bad, whatever it may be, acting, story, effects. There's something collectively when you put it all together, you don't mind if it's bad. It's just sort of an enjoyable experience. You've got the Cronenbergs and the Kubricks of the genre, who are really knocking it out of the park with some heavy, incredible, indelible stuff. Yeah. But all the other stuff is super duper light, and it's super fun, and people will eat a light snack in between some of the heavy meals,
In your opinion, how many sequels is too many for a franchise? Because some of these have gone on, especially the Friday the 13th, when he's in space.
Well, Friday the 13th, we all know that it has to hit at least 13 movies, and they haven't done that yet.
That's true.
Financial problems right now with the rights to the franchise, but. I was of the many folks who, other than being extremely disappointed that when Jason takes Manhattan, it's really Jason takes a boat on the way to Manhattan. When Jason was in space and people, select people like, oh, that's silly. I'm like, really? That's silly? Of course. Let's put, we finally got him out of Crystal Lake, and he did some shopping in Manhattan. Well, let's put him in space for now. He's already been to hell.
He has to restock.
There's new weapons out. He's got to find new things. I always love how
I just want to interject real quick about that. And they found a lot of creativity there. I mean, the fact that they had a holodeck where Jason goes on and he's kind of back at Camp Crystal Lake, even though it's a holodeck experience, that's just brilliant to me.
Yeah. I love in that, too, is how they had something like a Leprechaun series, let's say, I'll use that as an example, but they have sub-sequels to the Leprechaun series. So it's like Leprechaun 1, 2, and 3, then Leprechaun in the Hood 1 and 2. You know what I mean?
I think when there's nothing left to lose, the filmmakers get that much more creative.
Yeah, that's true. I'll still go see it.
They end up being some of the more entertaining entries in an ongoing franchise. But if you think about it, I mean, for every successful franchise, whether or not you like all the movies or some of the movies, the 80s landscape and beyond is just littered with the remnants of wannabe franchise icons who just never caught on.
Yeah. Now, going back to the 80s, when you were like a young person in the 80s, what movies
Oh, wait,
did
I'm
you...
a young person now.
Oh, that's right. When you were a younger person. What movies did you gravitate to? Like, what were your go-to repeats in your VCR? What
In
did
the
you...
80s?
Yeah.
I was all over the map. I was a movie fiend.
Yep.
But I really found myself gravitating to anything that was genre. So, I mean, it could be, I saw first run all of these titles. I mean, I saw The Thing in the theater. I saw Firefox in the theater, Clint Eastwood's Firefox.
Yeah.
Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan. I was a huge sci-fi nerd and Star Trek nerd. Gremlins and Poltergeist and anything Spielberg. It's all just, it's funny. I remember, I have a very, very potent memory of seeing E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
Yeah.
Because, I just literally, it's Steven Spielberg's new film. I have to see it, of course. But I have a very fond memory of being in this place called Movie Land in Yonkers, New York, in the area where I grew up. And the movie starts, and if you recall the beginning of E.T. the Extraterrestrial, when you first see E.T. kind of in the woods waddling around, you're kind of like, what is this? It's not the Close Encounters things that I remember seeing.
Yeah.
And you're like, you're not quite sure. And then, of course, E.T., really wins over everyone's heart. But I remember the girls in front of me said really loud, whispering to each other, this sucks. I told you we should have seen Dawn of the Dead. And then, by the end of the movie, they were bawling their eyes out.
That's awesome.
That was a very happy, funny memory. But yeah, I saw everything. I really gravitated to whatever was out there, even if it wasn't such a great film. I loved it. I could go on forever, but one other thing was I remember seeing a double feature of Excalibur and Outland that they offered.
Yeah.
And that just blew my mind.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That era was so chock full of all kinds of brand new stories, and not just in horror, but like you said, in fantasy. And you had your Dark Crystal and your Time Bandits and all these massive worlds that were created in the 80s. And like, as kids at that time, it was so fantastic and so unknown. You couldn't help but be attracted to everything that was in the theater at that time.
Well, I read Famous Monsters, and then I read Fangoria, but I was also an avid reader of Starlog.
Oh, yeah.
And I was a huge James Bond fan. And, I just really covered the bases. If it had to do with imagination and being transported to another world, like Kramer versus Kramer would come around, I'd be like, I don't think so.
That's right. Yep. Yeah.
Well, anything else.
It didn't build.
Where's Damien the Omen 3?
It didn't build a world. Those sorts of movies are. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the drama, but they don't build the same sort of fantastic worlds that you can really escape into.
I think that's you hit the nail on the head there. Is for me at least, and I think for folks like us who are kind of from peas in the same pod, it's about escapism.
Yeah.
It's about think about how amazing it is that people in some far off land named Hollywood were throwing millions of dollars to create a 2-hour experience where you could be transported away from your homework and domestic life and what have you, good or bad or medium. And you just got to escape in the darkness with your popcorn. It sounds romanticized, but it's exactly what I went after, week after week.
It's true, and I think that's why we just keep going back to them. You had mentioned you mentioned Famous Monsters. Tell us about your experience with the magazine.
Well, I loved the magazine when I was a kid. It's the first magazine I regularly bought, other than comic books. And I became aware of it after I'd seen a revival screening of The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. I'm a huge Ray Harryhausen fan.
Oh, same here.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Lou's a massive Harryhausen fan over here.
So I used to watch that on TV all the time, and when I got to see that on the big screen, and the insane Cyclops and everything that was in there, the skeleton sword battle.
Yeah,
I was just that was my Star Wars before Star Wars.
Right.
And,
yep.
And so I remember seeing it just was a serendipitous thing where a Famous Monsters magazine put the Cyclops on its cover, and I remember just being in the newsstand, and I was like, "This is my magazine. This is for me." Cut to me moving to Hollywood after going to film school and meeting Forey Ackerman at the Acker Mansion. He used to open up his home and he was the ultimate collector of knickknacks and movie memorabilia and priceless artifacts and completely trashy plastic, who knows what and where. But he was a tall tale teller, and I could really talk a lot about this. What was special about Famous Monsters was that all the geeks and the nerds and the movie fans who read it felt a sense of community.
Yeah.
And Forey Ackerman made himself a personality. He was the editor of the magazine, and he made himself accessible and kind of the uncle to all. He was Uncle Forey. He put his own phone number in the magazine. If you wanted to call him, I kid you not.
His personal phone number.
Yeah, his first. Yes.
Wow.
Personal phone number.
I can only imagine some of the calls he got.
Yeah, I don't know that would fly these days, but good for him.
I don't think anyone would do that.
No,
but,
that's amazing.
Really connected with his fans, but so I got to meet him. I got to finally, and that was just a real thrill for me. And then years later, when I was working at Entertainment Tonight, I met the editor of Famous Monsters magazine in line to go see a movie, to see The Hobbit, a screening. He had his Famous Monsters sweatshirt, and I just started chatting with him. I said, "Nice sweatshirt." He's like, "Thanks a lot." I'm like, "That was like my favorite magazine as a kid." And he said, "Oh, well, what do you do?" Because I'm the editor. And I said, "Well, I work for Entertainment Tonight, and I just went to a Star Trek junket, and I was talking to JJ and all the folks." And he's like, "Oh, well, hey, I've been looking to have someone write a Star Trek piece bridging the show with the movies. How'd you like to write it?"
Wow.
And I'm like, "Well, how would I like to write for the magazine I loved as a kid?" I twist my arm.
Yeah.
Cut to, I interviewed J.J. Abrams for that, and I wrote a bunch of pieces, including a Seventh Voyage of Sinbad piece. And when all was said and done, and I left Entertainment Tonight, Famous Monsters opened up their doors to me and brought me in as managing editor, and I turned around very quickly and was fortunate to become the executive editor. Ed Blair was the previous one before me, and he's the one who gave me my opportunity, so I'm very much indebted to him.
And all of this came from a conversation in line to see The Hobbit.
100%.
That is an amazing origin story.
Well, it just goes to show that if you like something, if you see something, if you make an observation, if you want to make conversation, obviously reading body language, if someone turns their back or says, "Get the hell out of go away, I'm getting a restraining order."
Yeah.
You talk to people, just make conversation. You never know where it's going to lead.
They always say in radio, all they can say is no. Right?
Yep.
Like you can ask
right.
you can ask to do anything, park wherever you want to park, but all they can say is no to you.
That's very true.
You might got to take a chance.
And so was it sort of your time there and connections there that led to the doc?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, I would say that's a definite stepping stone. I think if perhaps because I spent 13 years in Entertainment Tonight, and I did countless interviews with folks at junkets and so on. I would say that's how I cut my teeth on that part of the job, that craft of the job. But I would say what gave me the ultimate street cred, other than having like a Wilhelm scream in the beginning of my opening, is having where I did 7 issues. We were bi-monthly, so I worked there for over a year, and ultimately, left reluctantly, but I had a wonderful time and wonderful opportunities there. And I got to talk to your friend Mark Hamill, and
yes.
James Cameron, Guillermo del Toro, John Carpenter, all these just amazing. I got to sit down with Martin Landau and talk. I talked with him about Space 1999 and Ed Wood, and he gave me 4 hours of his time.
Wow.
4 hours.
And I felt like I got a one-man show. It was probably the best interview I ever had in my life. It was spectacular.
That is remarkable. So of all of the people you've talked to over the years, who is the one that you sort of fanboyed over most?
In different ways. There are times where, because I meet all these folks, and I'm always fanboying in some way, shape, or form. But there's some people who I just, I feel like I'm punching above my weight. So it's an opportunity to just have a conversation with these people. So Harrison Ford, Oliver Stone, Mark Hamill, even JJ and the cast of Star Trek, the Hobbit cast. I mean, it's kind of a laundry list. I'm super duper lucky that I've gotten to interview so many people. But Mark Hamill really stands out because I've interviewed him. I interviewed him twice, and the first time was when I was at Entertainment Tonight. Actually, I've interviewed him 3 times, twice at Entertainment Tonight, but the first time I ever sat down with him, I talked with him about this little movie called Sushi Girl that he was in, and he plays a supporting he plays sort of a Joker-style character, and he's amazing in it. You should definitely seek it out if you've never seen it. I remember after we talked for 20 minutes about Sushi Girl, and I'm sitting across from him outside of Comic-Con at the Hard Rock Hotel, and he's sitting on a swivel chair, just swiveling around and around while he's talking to me like a floating Jedi. And I said, well, with the time I have left, if you don't mind, I'd really like to ask a question or two about this little-known 70s movie that you took part of. And he goes, yes, well, sure, no problem. I'm happy to talk about it. And so I said, so Corvette Summer, you got to tell me. And he's just like, oh, my gosh, I can't believe you're talking about Corvette Summer. Nobody knows that movie anymore. But then we talked about Star Wars, and he said that for a kid who grew up loving Ray Harryhausen and Famous Monsters magazine, being in that cantina was this amazing, surreal experience. And I felt like, wait a minute, he's just a geek like all of us.
Yeah.
He appreciates the same things.
That's amazing. To be a geek and to grow up a geek and then to end up in a career where your geekdom just takes over. That's a gift right there.
He's the genuine article. He just loves stuff.
Yeah.
He really does.
That's amazing.
So tell us what, going back to the documentary, tell us people can expect from this documentary.
If you go to abshorrordoc.com, we're having an Indiegogo campaign that's going to go until the end of March. So if you want to reserve your copy or become a backer and look at that, that's how you get it. And we're hoping to have it in July. And the idea is to have a shorter cut and an extended cut because we've just got so much going on. So, we're looking at a 3-hour cut and then probably a 90-minute-ish cut. And we're doing lots of promotion right now because of the Indiegogo campaign. But, I'm in the trenches putting this thing together and having lots of fun doing it because it's a wealth of material, and the only problem I've got is picking the best stuff.
Right.
That's amazing. Well, we will have a link to the Indiegogo campaign on our loopandlarry.ca,
yes.
So you can go and check it out. A couple more quick questions for you before we let you go.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on the new generation of horror? The Jordan Peele's and the revival of the Stephen King movies. What are your thoughts there?
Well, that's a layered question. So, I think the new horror is wonderful. So many amazing films. Boy, I saw Hereditary last year, and that just blew me away.
Oh yeah.
And I think Jordan Peele's stuff is really amazing. I can't wait to see Us. Because there's a whole new element. You have a more sophisticated audience now. It's kind of like a post-Scream quadrilogy world. Yeah. Where the self-referential elements of horror have sort of changed people's perceptions of how they watch this stuff. And if anything, collectively, I think present-day horror has gotten to be much more visceral. And I think the pendulum has swung in terms of CGI. I think it got a little too CGI-ish, and people got a little tired of that. Mm-hmm. So I think now filmmakers are using a lot more practical effects and perhaps sweetening them a bit here and there with CGI, but you can't quite tell. Mm-hmm. So you really are invested in the story that they're telling. When it comes to these Stephen King remakes, you have to admit some of these Stephen King first-time-around films were not always so great.
That's right.
But it's a gold mine of amazing material.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm a huge fan of The Dead Zone, Christine, The Shining. Those are perfect films, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But Pet Sematary, I really enjoyed. Sometimes dead is better.
Yes.
But if it's coming out of John Lithgow's voice instead of Fred Gwynne, I'll definitely give it a shake. I think it could be fun, and I thought they did a wonderful job with it. I can't wait to see the second half of it. That to me was it all came down to Pennywise, and frankly, I actually just looking at photos of Pennywise, I was like, no, I'm not quite sure if I'm feeling the design of this, which was by amazing work by Amalgamated Dynamics and Alec Gillis and Tom Woodruff Jr. Once that movie started, and once Pennywise starts talking in the drain, and the delivery and that straight eye and that, oh my gosh,
that's so good.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much coming we have so much to be excited about.
Are you guys enjoying the contemporary landscape of horror and all these remakes? Are you excited about these remakes? Do you want to see the new Child's Play?
Absolutely. You know what? I was trepidatious, but having seen, and really, it was like the It movie was a catalyst for me. It really drew me back into the whole genre. I thought they're getting it right again. So I'm all on board with the new Pet Sematary and the remakes, and Jordan Peele. I mean, so far he can do no wrong. I mean, what I've heard about Us is just spectacular, and not to mention all of the horror that's moving to the small screen. With Twilight Zone reboots and the Chucky TV show.
Yeah, Chucky TV series. Just to declare, even though they were already planning to do it, just to say, guess what? The original Chucky is still here.
Yeah.
I got to sit down with Don Mancini. Actually, I sat down with him for a Child's Play piece on Hollywood Reporter, and then for the Hollywood Reporter for the 30th anniversary of that film, and then. I got to sit down with him and Tom Holland for this film, for In Search of Darkness, and so I've gotten sort of the candid reveal of what he really thinks about this Chucky remake, and they were both producer David Kirshner and Don Mancini were approached to be part of this new Child's Play reboot. But they, respectfully declined, yet they're making the movie anyway due to complicated arrangement of rights. So they're not entirely pleased that it's happening. And you're going to see an interesting division between stalwart chunky fans of Chunky Soup.
Yes.
Chucky fans and, people who are going to give it a shake, to see if it's good or not. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, but I am very, very much looking forward to that Chucky TV series because they're really going to have an opportunity to expand this whole storyline. I don't know if you saw Cult of Chucky at the very end, but there's multiple Chuckies. And so it really opens up doors to all sorts of possibilities.
And I think just all of what TV has to offer, the horror genre, is creating new fans and building excitement for it just because of the amount of time that you can devote to a story that you can't give in 2 hours. So, I mean, I think moving to the small screen is not a bad thing.
I think I'm a huge fan of Stranger Things.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Stranger Things would have failed on all levels if it was just a film. I think if it was a 2-hour film, it just would have felt like a very derivative story. But by having, 10 hours to tell that tale and really just have lots of respectful, wonderful, happy, nostalgic nods to all of its influences, whether it's Stephen Carpenter or Stephen King, it's amazing. It's a great thing, but I don't think it definitely would have worked if it was only a 2-hour film.
Well, I have a final question for you. If there's a hidden gem from the 80s, a movie maybe not all of us have seen, what would it be?
Other than Shopping Mall? Well, I've been really, and this is, I'm not affiliated with them, but I've been really enjoying what's been coming out on Shudder.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of stuff that I did not get an opportunity to see that I'm finally getting to see, especially because, for my job, I get to see 80s horror movies all day. So for the ones that I haven't seen, I get to rewatch the ones I haven't seen in a long time, and the ones I haven't seen, I know what I'm talking about and talking to the people about. And I'd never seen Brain Dead before. Right. I don't know if you guys have seen that, and it's eccentric, it's weird, it's Lynchian, it's perverted, It's not broad entertainment, but it is funny as hell.
Yeah.
And I highly recommend that. And I also highly recommend, Larry Cohen movies. I don't know if you've seen, Q, the It's Alive trilogy, The Stuff.
Yeah.
Fun, ridiculous, clever, tongue-in-cheek stuff. Michael Moriarty anchors a lot of these films. It's good stuff. See, I can't even give you one.
That's fine. There's so much in the 80s, right? Like, it's so hard. Like,
And that's why people need to see this documentary.
yes.
yeah, especially these little, nutshell moments. God, I actually really want to deliver something to you because I love them all in all different ways. I'm like the mother who's like, "Oh, all my homely children are beautiful to me."
And I think you're not unlike most people who are fans of horror in the 80s. Everybody loves everything.
All right, I'm looking at a stack of Scream Factory reissue Blu-rays of 80s horror, and one film that I loved in 1978, I think it was Phantasm.
Oh, yeah.
One of my favorites. And in the late 80s, Phantasm 2 came out.
Right.
And that's basically it's kind of like what Evil Dead 2 is to Evil Dead, Phantasm 2 is to Phantasm. It's kind of a reworking of the same story with a more fortified budget and much more imaginative because they could do crazy things with effects. And it's kind of like a lock and load version of Phantasm, and I highly recommend that.
So much to watch.
That's
so
awesome.
Much out there.
Thank you so much for being on the show, David. We really appreciate this.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. I enjoy chatting with you guys because you know what the hell I'm talking about.
We sure do, and we will be first in line watching the doc in our living rooms when we get the Blu-rays.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks again. That was David Weiner, writer-director of In Search of Darkness, a journey into iconic 80s horror. Talking all things horror and making us geek out even more than we usually do.
He had some great stories.
Whew, that was good stuff. The doc comes out in July. If you want to support it, and I think you should, we'll have the Indiegogo address on our website, so you can click there and get your very own copy.
Well, that was our big special.
Yep.
We've never done a special before. It was our first special.
And that was pretty special.
That was very special. And we'll see you, I guess, next Friday with a brand new episode.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll see you then.
Produced by Matthew C. Loop and Lawrence Simner. A Loop and Larry production.
Bueller.
He likes it. Hey, Mikey.
Bueller.
Bad news. Fog is getting thicker.
And Leon's getting larger.
Inconceivable.
Brian's right. It's an elf.
Wax on.
Does Barry Manilow know that you raid his wardrobe?
Oh, Captain, my Captain.
Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Wax off.